Hello again, everyone. Today we're going to have the last lecture for this unit. It is called Blood pH Regulation. Okay, and you need to read your textbook from page 1026 to 1035 before you watch this video. Okay. All right, let me start the lecture notes. Okay, so before we talk about the pH regulation, we need to review some basics. Okay, acid is something which can release hydrogen ions. So free hydrogen ion concentration determines the pH. All right, so this is why it says pH is the measurement of a free hydrogen concentration. The more free hydrogen, the lower the pH. That's more acidic of the solution. So pH is constantly regulated in our body fluids. We have a very small physiological pH window. Okay, it's between 7.35 to 7.45. Lower than 7.35 is called acidosis. Higher than 7.45 is called alkalosis. So either way is not good. Too low or too high pH can affect your metabolisms. One way you can think of, the pH, if the pH is off, the enzymes cannot work properly, and then that will mess up your chemical reactions. So to regulate blood pH, there are three big arms of regulation in terms of mechanisms. The first one is called chemical buffer systems. The second one is respiratory system, can be used to regulate blood pH. And the third one is urinary system, can be used to regulate blood pH. So we'll go over each arm now. So the first one is the chemical buffer system. So the chemical buffer system, that means in your blood there are chemicals which can help to buffer or help to regulate the pH, blood pH. So three mechanisms under the chemical buffer system. Protein buffer system, bicarbonate buffer system, and a phosphate buffer system. So if we look at the protein buffer system, we know most of the proteins, they have negative charges on they carry negative charges. So if they carry negative charges, then they have the ability to bind to a hydrogen ion, because hydrogen ion carries the positive charge. By doing that, it can take the free hydrogen away. So hydrogen will bind with protein, and by taking free hydrogen away, this can lower the free hydrogen concentration in the blood and then to increase pH. So this is how the protein buffer works. Okay, so by chelating or by binding to hydrogen ions to take hydrogen ions away and to adjust the pH. Okay, the second one is called a bicarbonate buffer system. This one I probably should spend a little bit more time on it. Okay, this is protein buffer. The second one is bicarbonate buffer system. So the equation is here. All right, you really need to know this equation really well, because you're going to see this equation a lot. Okay, so basically this one says carbon dioxide combined with water to make carbonic acid, And the carbonic acid is a weak acid which can partially dissociate to release free hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. And these reactions can go in both directions. If there are a lot of hydrogen ions accumulated, then this reaction can go toward to the carbon dioxide side. But if there are a lot of carbon dioxide, then it can go to sorry about that. So let's continue on this. Okay. We're talking about this called bicarbonate buffer system. All right, this is the equation. If there are a lot of CO2 buildup in the blood, then the reaction tends to go to this direction to produce more bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions, and vice versa. Okay, so this is a very important buffer system, because if you see if there are a lot of hydrogen ions in blood, then that will make the blood pH really low. And in this case, this hydrogen ion combined with the bicarbonate ion and then convert the hydrogen ions in the form of CO2 and water. Okay, so this is the second one. It's called, let me go back. This bicarbonate buffer system. Bicarbonate buffer system. The third one is called a phosphate buffer system. Let me show you the equation here. Oops, where's the phosphate buffer system? Okay. Okay, the phosphate buffer system, it is not showing on my slide, so let me use my whiteboard to show you this. Give me 1 second. Let me open my whiteboard here. Okay, it's taking a while. I don't know why it takes so long. Oops. Okay, let's see. Whiteboard. Here we go. Okay, so in this buffer system, basically is monohydrogen phosphate, which has the 2 negative charges on the surface, which can combine with a hydrogen ion to be converted to the bihydrogen phosphate, like that. So this is a chemical reaction, all right? So again, this reaction can go both ways. Depends on which side has more materials. So this one only has 1 hydrogen, is called a monohydrogen phosphate. Can get a free hydrogen ion, okay, to form this dihydrogen phosphate. By doing that, you're taking these free hydrogen ions away. Then you're going to lower this hydrogen ion concentration in the solution. And by doing that, you can increase the pH. I hope you got that. Okay, alrighty. So let's see. Let me go share my slides here again. Okay, so now we talked about the three different mechanisms in the chemical buffer system. Proteins combined with some free hydrogen ions, and phosphate mono hydrogen phosphate combined with free hydrogen ions. And this bicarbonate buffer system is by converting CO2 and water into the form of hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions. Okay, so then these slides are the individual slides for different chemical buffer system. All right, and then did I go too fast? Okay, we did this. And then, all right, we talked about the pH regulation. We said the chemical buffer system can regulate the pH, and then urinary system can regulate the pH, and the respiratory system can involve in pH regulation as well. So now we're looking at the renal mechanisms for pH regulation. Okay, so if you look at this slide, you see the chemical buffers can tie up excess acids or bases, but they cannot eliminate them from the body. For example, the proteins can bind with the free hydrogen ions temporarily, so the free hydrogen ions are removed from the solution, but it is still in your body. It never really get rid of them, outside your body. So this is why it says chemical buffers can tie up, but cannot get rid of them. All right, but renal system is different. So if we can secrete hydrogen ions from the blood into the filtrate, and then the filtrate will continue to travel toward to the collecting duct, if you remember, and then it becomes urine, and then excreted out from the body. So in this way, so we can actually get rid of free hydrogen ions by getting rid of them outside of the body. Then you can adjust the blood pH. So this is actually more important mechanism. It can regulate pH more significantly than using the chemical buffering system. So that's why it says the ultimate acid-base regulatory organs are the kidneys. So in terms of the mechanisms, renal system, they can regulate blood pH by this one, conserving or reabsorbing or generating new bicarbonate ions. So let's just say, basically, it doesn't matter if it's reabsorbing or generating new bicarbonate ions. As long as you get bicarbonate ions back into the blood, this one can bind with hydrogen ions and take hydrogen ions away. This is why it's saying here, losing a bicarbonate ion is the same as gaining a hydrogen ion. Or you can say reabsorbing a bicarbonate ion is the same as losing a hydrogen ion. Do you understand this? Okay, one more time. Reabsorbing a bicarbonate ion is the same as losing a hydrogen ion, because once you get bicarbonate ions in, bicarbonate ions can take the hydrogen ions away. Okay, so how can bicarbonate ions be reabsorbed? There are different ways. Okay, so this is one mechanism. This mechanism is on your in your book 1030. Okay, this diagram, it is called reabsorption of filtered bicarbonate ions is coupled with hydrogen secretion. Okay, so let me explain this mechanism. So you saw this diagram before. Here is the filtrate. Okay, these are the proximal convoluted tubule cells. Okay, cuboidal cells, and on this side is blood capillary. So you have two sides of the membranes. This side is called apical membrane facing the filtrate. This side is called the basolateral membrane facing the blood capillaries. And on these membranes, there are different transport systems. So the key here is the basolateral membrane is impermeable for hydrogen ions. So hydrogen ions cannot cross this part, okay? And then this apical membrane is impermeable to bicarbonate ions. All right, so keep that in mind. Otherwise, you say, all right, so if there are too many hydrogen ions, can we just take the hydrogen ions out this way and then go directly to the filtrate? You cannot, because this basolateral membrane is impermeable to hydrogen ion. All right, so is this has any advantage for us? Yes, because this mechanism in terms of regulating blood pH has more steps involved. The more steps involved, the more point regulation, the finer regulations, the better regulation. Okay, so this mechanism is called reabsorption of bicarbonate ions, or is coupled to hydrogen secretion. So when we talk about hydrogen secretion, when we talk about a secretion, that is another function of the urinary system. Secretion is defined by actively get rid of something from the blood into the filtrate. That is called secretion. Okay, so let's look at this mechanism. I know it's kind of overwhelming. Let's just go step by step. So the first step is here in the cuboidal cells. CO2, carbon dioxide, bind with water to form carbonic acid and partially dissolve into bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions. Okay, remember the bicarbonate ions is permeable to this basolateral membrane, so it can be transported back into the blood. Okay, and then hydrogen ions is permeable. The apical membrane is permeable to hydrogen ions, so hydrogen ions can be transported into the filtrate. Once the hydrogen get to the filtrate, it's going to bind with bicarbonate ions filtered from blood to form more CO2. And then this CO2 can diffuse, okay, based on the concentration gradient and back into the cell. And then as long as you have a lot of CO2 in the cuboidal cell, this reaction will continue to go this direction to have more bicarbonate ions made, and the bicarbonate ions can be reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, so this one, every time you reabsorb a bicarbonate ion, a hydrogen ion will be secreted into the filtrate. This is why this mechanism is called reabsorption of bicarbonate ion, is coupled with hydrogen secretion. Okay, so once you have bicarbonate ions in the blood, you know bicarbonate ions can bind with the hydrogen ions to increase blood pH. Okay, Next mechanism is called hydrogen ion secretion. So this mechanism is in your book, page 1031. It is called a new bicarbonate ion is generated via buffering of secreted hydrogen by monohydrogen phosphate. Okay, so again, if you look at this cuboidal cell here, filtrate, blood capillaries, water and CO2 bind to form to form carbonic acid, and partially dissociated to form hydrogen and bicarbonate ions. So the hydrogen again can be transported into the filtrate. In the filtrate, it's going to bind with monohydrogen phosphate to form bihydrogen phosphate. So you continue to remove the hydrogen away to keep this reaction going from CO2 side to this bicarbonate ion side. Okay, so this phosphate buffer system is normally only seen in the urinary system. In the regular blood circulation, we do not really use this phosphate buffering system. So this one I should say this phosphate buffering system play a significant role in the urinary system in terms of buffering blood pH. Okay, so again, the bicarbonate ion can be transported back into blood. You don't need to remember exactly what mechanisms are used or what type of transport are used to transport different ions into the blood or into the filtrate. Okay, this is more important to understand. Okay, the bicarbonate ions are generated in the PCT cells, and the bicarbonate ions can be reabsorbed back into the blood, and the hydrogen ions will be removed in the filtrate by binding to the hydrogen phosphate to form dihydrogen phosphate. Okay, another mechanism to adjust the blood pH. This one is, let me see, this one is in your book, page 1032. Okay, so the mechanism is called the new bicarbonate ion is generated via glutamine metabolism and ammonium secretion. So inside of PCT, there is a chemical called glutamine. This glutamine can split up to form, each glutamine can split up to form 2 ammonium ions and 2 bicarbonate ions. So this bicarbonate ion is a new product by breaking down glutamine. This reaction need to have this enzyme here, okay, has a specific enzyme here so glutamine being digested to form ammonium ions and bicarbonate ions. So these newly formed bicarbonate ions can be reabsorbed into the blood, and ammonium ions will get into the filtrate and excreted out in urine. Okay, so this is another way to get more bicarbonate ions back into the blood. All right, so basically we talked about the 3 different mechanisms for renal regulation. So the first one is called reabsorption of filtered bicarbonate ions. Are coupled to hydrogen secretion. The second one is a new bicarbonate ion is generated via buffering of secreted hydrogen by monohydrogen phosphate. The third mechanism is by digesting glutamine to produce new bicarbonate ions and ammonium ions. Okay, so these three mechanisms, I really want you to review the mechanisms by reading the book and also going through these steps from the diagram. My diagrams are the same as in your book. So the steps are labeled, numbered, so you really should write down each step in your own words to understand this process. Okay, so urinary system can be used to regulate the blood pH by control how much bicarbonate ions being reabsorbed and also by secrete hydrogen ions. Okay, respiratory system can regulate blood pH as well. So how can respiratory system regulate blood pH? Let me go back to the formula I showed you earlier. Hold on. Okay, here we go. CO2 and water can be converted to the form of carbonic acid and partially dissociated into ions. So this is exactly the same reactions in the respiratory system. Let's say if your blood is acidic, that means you have accumulated more hydrogen ions. Then you try to lower the hydrogen ion concentrations to increase pH. So what can you do? This because you have a lot of hydrogen ions here, is going to combine with bicarbonate ions to make the reaction go in this direction to make more CO2. So you're going to blow air out, okay, exhalation to get rid of CO2. So you can change your breathing pattern to get rid of more CO2. Okay, so for example, when you yarning, especially when you stay in a small room, with many people, a lot of CO2 build up. Let's say if you stay in the movie theater for hours because there are more CO2 in the room, and then inside of the movie theater, you stay there watching movie, a lot of the CO2 will be converted to this ion forms, and then the hydrogen ions in your blood will make your blood pH lower than normal. So once you get out of the movie theater, the fresh air come in and less CO2, but now you have a lot of hydrogen ions in the blood, so the reactions tends to go this way to make more CO2. Then you're going to yarn, you probably will yarning a lot more, once you get out of the movie theater. What are you doing is try to blow out more CO2 to reduce the concentration of hydrogen ion. That's how the respiratory system works in terms of regulating blood pH by adjusting the breathing patterns. Okay, so we talked about three big groups of regulation. One is a chemical buffering system. Another one is the urinary system to regulate pH. And the last one is respiratory system used to regulate the pH. Okay, so there are conditions for blood pH, abnormal blood pH. One is called acidosis. That means too much of hydrogen ions. Or it is called alkalosis. That means is not enough hydrogen ions. Okay, pH is too high. So respiratory acidosis, it means the acidosis, this low blood pH is caused by respiratory system. The good example would be COPD, chronic pulmonary disease. These people, patients, they cannot have a normal gas exchange, so they have more and more CO2 accumulated in the blood. And more CO2, remember, if you have a lot of CO2, the CO2 will be converted into the form of bicarbonate ions and hydrogen ions. Then the blood pH will change. Too much of hydrogen ions make the blood pH lower. That is called respiratory acidosis. Okay. Respiratory alkalosis is relatively rare. Okay. So let's say if somehow you blow out more CO2, this happens when you get to the higher altitude. It may happen every time you breathe, you blow out more CO2. So your blood hydrogen ions will be lower than normal, and then the pH is too high. That is called respiratory alkalosis. Okay. So here give you the causes for respiratory acidosis and respiratory alkalosis. Okay, this one you can think about. Let me give you an example. So let's say if you are a swimmer, if you are a swimmer and right before you get into water, you want to hyperventilate. Okay, deep breath, blow out a lot of CO2 before you get into the water. Okay, and this is because normally we say CO2 is the key factor, turn on or turn off your respiration, okay, your breathing. So if you have a very low carbon dioxide in your blood, then you can stay in the water longer before your next breath. So this is what the swimmers want to do, okay? But if you're not a trained swimmer and you hyperventilate a lot, so you get rid of too much of CO2, that may cause a lot of problems. One of the problem is to make your blood to make your blood decrease in hydrogen ion concentration and cause respiratory alkalosis. Okay, and then acidosis and alkalosis also can be related to the metabolism. So it is called metabolic acidosis and metabolic alkalosis. So this acidosis is due to the chemical reactions, all right, and to make the blood pH too low. Okay, typical causes here: too much alcohol or excessive loss of bicarbonate ions. This can be done by, let's say, diarrhea. The bicarbonate ions should be absorbed from your GI tract. So if you have diarrhea, not enough time for bicarbonate ions to absorb into the blood, then you're going to have metabolic acidosis. Okay, another cause is accumulation of lactic acid. So do you know what can cause the accumulation of lactic acid? Let's say if you have not doing a lot of exercises for a long time, suddenly said, okay, I decide today's the day I'm going to work out like extremely to to start build up my muscles, start to build up my shape. So you go to the gym, you work out really, really hard, but because your muscles are not used to this situation, and your muscles are working out and need a lot of ATP, but oxygen is not enough. You know, you're not adapted to this new situation. So you're going to use anaerobic respiration, and also you're going to make the ATP by without oxygen. So if you make ATP without oxygen, you're going to generate a lot of lactic acid, and that's going to accumulate it in your muscle and then get into your blood. That will cause the metabolic acidosis. Okay, diabetes also, starvation, because you break down fat, and you know fat can be break down into fatty acids, so it is an acid. All right, so all these will can be the causes for getting metabolic acidosis. Okay, metabolic alkalosis. So this one, let's say, we know our gastric juice is acidic. So if you're vomiting, get rid of a lot of acid containing gastric juice, then it can cause alkalosis, blood alkalosis. This is due to the metabolic alkalosis. So basically, we're talking about acidosis and alkalosis. For each one, for acidosis, it can be respiratory acidosis, it can be metabolic acidosis. For alkalosis, same thing. It can be respiratory related alkalosis, and it can be metabolic related alkalosis. So in terms of regulation, all right, so if it's a respiratory acidosis, let's just use the example. If it's respiratory acidosis, it is caused by respiratory problem, then of course the respiratory system cannot be used to compensate this problem, to compensate this condition. So in this case, only the urinary system can be used to regulate the pH, to adjust the pH. Okay, so if it is a metabolic acidosis, that is the chemical reaction related acidosis. In this case, your respiratory system is working fine, your urinary system is working fine. So both systems can be used to adjust blood pH. Okay, so the rest of the slides are kind of give you more in-depth information how the respiratory and urinary systems are worked to compensate abnormal conditions. All right, so you can read this through. The bottom line is, okay, if it's a respiratory problem, then respiratory system cannot be used to compensate. All right, and only the urinary system can be used. But if it's a metabolic abnormal conditions, then both respiratory and urinary systems can be used to adjust pH. All right, so I think that's it for this lecture. It's called, let's see, let me stop sharing here. Okay, stop sharing. Let's see. Okay. What happened to this one? Okay, so this is the last lecture we have for this unit. Okay, so after you finish watching this video, I really want you to go back to your book and reread the pages and try to write down the mechanisms in your own words. Okay, and after that, I'm going to post a homework on Canvas. I will send you an email and give you instructions for homework and also for assignment on MyLab and mastering. Okay, our exam will be our exam for Unit 3 and Unit 4 is going to be a combined exam. I will post the exam on April the 24th, and you have 4 days to finish both the lecture and lab exam. Okay, so I'm hoping you can finish by April 28th. Okay, and then start from April 27th that week, we're going to cover the last unit for this semester, which is the digestive system. Alrighty, I'll see you next time.